Everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. This public special meeting and board budget work session of the Board of Education and the CBRC for March 19th, 2024 is called to order. All items being considered this evening are posted on the PPS website under the board and meeting tabs. This meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV services website and on channel 28, and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. So please check the district website for all the replay times. Welcome. We're here this evening to talk about the budget work session with the Budget Review Committee, Community Budget Review Committee, commonly referred to as the CBRC. Before moving into tonight's work, we do have 2 items to vote on this evening: our consent agenda and a resolution that authorizes the increased seating capacity of the Roosevelt grandstands and to complete the McDaniel Fieldhouse. So we're going to start with the consent agenda. Board members, are there any items you would like to pull for discussions? We will set those aside to be on the regular agenda for the next board meeting. All right, hearing none. Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
No.
Board members, are there any, oh, we already did that. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Director Scott moved and Director Brim-Edwards seconds the adoption of the consent agenda. Is there any board discussion on the consent agenda?
Charles. Just noting that we're approving 5 field trips. And I would ask, as I often do, whether there's value that the board members got out of approving these 5 field trips, because again, I'll just remind everyone there's a tremendous amount of administrative work that goes into it, both from the school level and staff, to bring these things to us. So I can put that out there as policy.
Yes, and to that note,
Consistent.
one of the reasons why I do like it on the consent agenda, so for instance, I think it's next month or the month next, I think it's next month, we're going to actually have those students come and present on their trips that they had, and had I not known that they were going on those trips, I would have been able to invite them to explain the trip. But I did that because I knew you keep saying.
I hear Owens, with all due respect. I mean, those kids are going on field trips, so we don't need to approve the field trips in order to invite them. I think inviting them makes a ton of sense. I will say in my 5 years, we've never once denied a field trip.
Yeah.
So again, I think as we talk about, what our role is as a board, this feels pretty outside.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right, the board will now vote on resolution 6876 through 6880 and 6882. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed? All right, Student Director Silverstein, please indicate your vote.
Yes.
Are there any abstentions? And there'll be one for me. The consent agenda as amended has been approved by a vote of 6-1 with 1 extension, with our student director Silverstein voting yes.
I think it's 5-0 with
5?
extension.
Oh, Herman's not here. 5-1. 5-0, 1 abstention, and our student director Silverstein voting yes. All right, so next on the agenda is the resolution authorizing improvements to an appropriation for the Roosevelt grandstands and an appropriation for the McDaniel Fieldhouse. We're looking to add additional seating to the Roosevelt High School grandstands and the completion of the McDaniel Fieldhouse project in time for 2024 spring sports season. Resolution authorized expenditures of capital funds not to exceed $2.5 million to increase the capacity of the Roosevelt grandstands by 1,500 seats, additional 800 seats for the visitors, and the structure beneath the stands will be considered in the potential 2024 bond project. For the McDaniel Fieldhouse project, the resolution authorized the expenditure of capital funds not to exceed $247,000 for a final construction and installation payment to be made immediately. This resolution was brought forward by Vice Chair Green and Director Brim-Edwards and presented to the Facilities and Operations Committee, where it was unanimously approved to be referred to the full board for consideration this evening. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt resolution 6881?
So moved.
Second.
All right, Director Brim Edwards moves, Director Wong seconds. Is there any board discussion?
I have some questions about this. The resolution doesn't note where the funding is coming from. And I'll be honest, I actually only became aware of this issue when I just happened to come to the end of the last F&O committee meeting, because I don't believe we briefed the full board in any of the committee updates and board meetings. So I need a little more information on where the money's coming from.
I had those exact same questions. I would like to know more, particularly when reading through the staff memo, it's not clear where the money's gonna come from. So I don't think, unless I missed that, but it's got a not to exceed price, but then we've got all these the other questions.
Dan's gonna come up and answer that question.
The long range facilities report calls out, like, all of our facilities need upgrading, and then there's an index that calls out moderate priority, and then probably, I guess there's no low priority, but I'm wondering, considering the temperature complaints that we get and the service calls for temperature, how we square, like, where's the money coming from, and how does this fit in with our high priority facilities?
Chair Hollins, before we turn to Dan, can I I'd like to say something, and that is that we have a lot of moving costs still with damaged facilities, two schools in particular, not knowing exactly what insurance is going to cover. And then we've had some project information that may change some of the costs and timeline, and we're not going to get into all of that tonight. Just in general, there is a concern about facility costs right this minute because of several things. So
Storm damage.
storm damage, and also some construction potential delays.
Yeah, and if I could I'll just do kind of a quick recap of the staff memo, really highlighting just the overall capital needs of the district and significant deferred maintenance needs. And the potential funding options are finite. So there's general fund, there's limited non-bond capital funds, and then there's potential bond funds as well. But all those, again, are limited, and the district's needs are pretty significant, especially in the existing facilities. So staff's recommendation was to consider this scope of work as part of the 2024 bond planning.
Okay.
That was the recommendation. The resolution, I don't think, doesn't say where the funds would come from. It just says.
So that's why I wanted to answer that question, is where these particular funds, because of my understanding, these funds was coming from leftover bond fund to pay for these repairs. So that's why I want to make sure we're clear.
I think that's a decision that would have to be made. The resolution doesn't specifically state where they're from.
So I'll just say why the resolution doesn't say it, because it was to give the site flexibility. Capital fund.
So I'm very uncomfortable with that approach as part of our budget
Well,
process.
we could
As
easily.
part of our budget process, when board members bring forward resolutions or amendments, we require to say where the money's going to go, but also where it comes from. I know this is not a formal budget amendment, which is also a little bit problematic. But I think folks who are going to support the resolution need to indicate where the money's going to come from. Otherwise. And I guess getting to that, and this is, Michelle, to your point, there is a trade-off here, and I guess I'm troubled the resolution doesn't talk about that trade-off. It sounds great. We're going to authorize this money for Roosevelt. I want to authorize the money for Roosevelt too. I want them to have the grandstands. What it doesn't say are what's the sewer project that's not going to get done, or the plumbing project, or the other
roof.
things. And to Superintendent Huss' point, we have 900 students right now who are displaced from their schools because their plumbing failed during the storm. It's a huge problem for those students, and I'm struggling a little bit with just authorizing $2.5 million for grandstands, which is going to take money away. I believe will take money away from deferred maintenance projects that might be higher priority. And we don't know what those projects are.
So I'm gonna try and channel, since he's not here.
Yeah.
In fairness, I'll try and represent. So there was a discussion in committee about the the leftover bond funds. And the case that Director Green made forcefully is most of the other modernization projects, this was incorporated as part of the modernization project. And on a number of fronts, this is partly, and Franklin has a different set of issues, but they were like sort of the first high schools out of the chute. And Roosevelt, didn't get built for 1,700 students. It didn't have adequate CTE space, and they didn't get the home grandstands that everybody else got. And so Director Green made a case that they've been waiting a long time. There's excess bond funds, and that this was an allocation from that. The original ask was for the home. He would say this much more energetically,
Seating 1,500.
And visitor seating, but this is just the home seating, which is what most of the other schools got in their, with the exception, obviously, of Grant, because of the whole issues related to the Grant Bowl. And then, so that is speaking to that project. For McDaniels, they actually have a completed field house. It's just they can't use it until the final construction is the final 200,000 payment is made, and it's something that Lincoln has field house they got through its modernization.
Yeah, and I guess, out of respect for Director Green, I'd be more than happy to, if the board wanted to hold this over so he could be here to have the conversation. I didn't realize he wasn't going to be here tonight. I do want to say I don't love the term excess bond funds, because we don't have excess bond funds, right? There's certain projects that, their budgets went up during the project. We might have come in under or have some extra contingency, but when you look through the memo, we don't have anywhere near enough funding in this district for all the deferred maintenance that we have. So, it's excess from one pot. Our decision is not, are we grabbing excess because it makes it sound like it's free money? Our decision is, are we prioritizing the Roosevelt grandstands above some of the other projects? And I understand Director Green's argument. I hear it. I also think looking through this memo at some of the other things, when another school plumbing breaks, what are we going to tell the community, right? And those kids are displaced.
I guess.
And Roosevelt has some great grandstands.
So I'm curious, Dan, between insurance and we don't have the resources to fix that?
Here, specific to the storm damage,
And I'm actually being broader than that. I'm not just, I'm just saying.
That's what's coming up.
We're pitting
Failed.
plumbing against grandstands.
Yeah, but if I get that if we're talking about plumbing, which we're talking about certain specific school, and I understand we talk about the broader scope of deferred maintenance that needs to be done. We know it's $700-some million or close to $1 billion that has to be done. So I understand that we're talking about a broader piece, and there's no, regardless we take from here or we take from there, there's never going to be enough money to do all the deferred maintenance that we have. That we just don't have the money for it. So looking at one piece versus another one, and because we're going to bring it up, the plumbing stuff, if that money was coming out of those, the bond funds versus the insurance, then that's a different conversation. Because then that's looking at, well, the insurance is supposed to be paying for that, so then that's not in the conversation anymore as far as that piece. But if you're talking about the overall deferred maintenance, just want to make sure we're clear. We have almost $1 billion worth of deferred maintenance. So this one piece is not going to put a dent in the overall deferred maintenance that we need to have here at PPS. Now, getting something that for a school in the underserved community gets versus other schools that have gotten the same stuff when we're talking about our bond funds, that's an equity issue. If you're saying this school shouldn't get it because it wasn't in the first one versus these schools because we learned more should get it, to me that sounds like equity, not necessarily a prioritization piece. Just my thoughts.
Just like to weigh in again on the finances. This is a great conversation and dialogue, and you all will make that decision. But I think what I've been hearing from staff, if the unknowns on finances that continue to grow, concerns are from the damaged buildings. And then there is a building that's under construction where we're behind. If we're gonna stay on schedule, there could be some significant overrun costs. From a financial standpoint, those are the two things that seem to come to the top most.
So then my question would be, for instance, the being behind on Benson, because that's what we're talking about, Benson High School. Is the money from here going to cover that delta for what it might cost for Benson High School? If it is, then that's a different conversation. But if it's $20 million or $40 million, then that's not really a good comparison to use, because that 2.5 million or whatever we're using for the grandstands is not going to cover that delta.
But it's 2.5 million towards it. So you know, it's larger. And I guess I want to make sure, I don't want to make this I was using the example of the displaced students in my zone more as an example of what could continue to happen. I don't, but actually maybe flip it, to, last year we heard significant concerns about Ockley Green. And Director Green, in fact, went and visited and came back and said, this school needs serious help. And I think my question is, when we as a board, and this is a really important conversation for us to have, when we're talking about the very limited dollars and there's not enough, it's a question of where are we putting that? Should the $2.5 million go to grandstands, which I 100% believe Roosevelt needs and deserves, or should it go to fixing the rodent mold plumbing issues at Ockley Green? Well, we then talk in the bond about money in for Roosevelt. And I'm happy to lead the charge on this next bond of making sure that money is
I would
included.
just say that was 2017, the 2012 bond.
Yeah.
And the other, again, I'm just trying my best to channel. Green is the Roosevelt Field project happened during the 10 Fields project, without any support from PPS. Without any support from PPS. They raised all the money. Nike had a significant contribution. I think the city put something in as well, but PPS didn't put anything into it. Unlike most of the other fields. And that's a community that doesn't have the resources to do that. And it's just like, I know we wouldn't, at one point, the person who was previously in Marina's role, called me, I wasn't on the board then, but about Franklin, that they were gonna put the stubs of the stand in, but not actually the seats, because they were running out of money with that bond. And then they made the community pay for a different material for the outside of the Performing Arts Center because they didn't have money. So those two schools, those two had some significant value engineering that happened. And one of the things that valued engineered at Roosevelt is they didn't get stands. And that could be a decision the board wants to wait to the next bond. From my perspective, from an equity issue, I wouldn't do it now. And on the McDaniel piece, we've got a good amount of our schools that serves many students of color, lower income students, that has raised a lot of money for their own project. They can't get over the finish line, so they have a completed building. It's open, but they can't actually use it because they're $250,000 short project.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to put this credit, but we jumped to the chance of making a right or wrong way grant. It was no issue about the money. The money wasn't even an option. I remember you said no matter what it cost, we need to make it for grant.
For the field.
For the field, yeah. Hold on. So I don't understand why we're not having that same sense of urgency for Roosevelt and McDaniels with the same sense of urgency. Now I understand that they're using the field and all that stuff. I get it, but it's the same urgency for Roosevelt with their grandstands and poor conditions that they're in. It should be the same urgency that we use for grant for the field and going to redo the track. even though the track wasn't
But you
all
just
that
acknowledge
bad.
the difference.
But the track wasn't that bad.
You just
And we
acknowledge the
doing
difference was
that.
that those students were not able to use their field because it failed and PPS shut it down.
But we also authorize money for the track, which is not necessarily a big priority because the track is okay. But we authorize money to redo the track, and I'm a track guy, so of course I love that. But that wasn't a real big priority either. And we authorized it for that.
We
as
were
well.
doing the field and doing the track. There was some symbiosis there. I mean, again, I feel like I'm getting pushed into this. Like I don't want Roosevelt to have the grandstands. I do, but we're talking about their grandstands, right?
Yeah.
Gary.
Oh, I know. I mean,
You've changed my
We're all listening, we're all listening.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that is the difference, right? To me, is that if this was an asset failure at Roosevelt that kids were not able to use something, then it would be a different sense of urgency. But that's for me the reason why I can wait is because you're talking about more spectators for their events, which is great. We should do it. I also want to say I'm a little worried, and I'm a little worried we're misusing equity when it comes to this because we haven't really done an equity analysis, right? I mean, Roosevelt's an underserved, community for sure. So are other schools in that region. So are other schools in Portland Public Schools. So I mean, to say, it's an equity issue because Roosevelt doesn't have grandstands. Yes, that's not really the comparison. The comparison is, do we build the grandstands or do we fix a much worse problem at a middle school or a grade school, right? And I think those are the trade-offs that I guess what I'm getting at, this resolution makes those trade-offs, it doesn't call them out. And I think that board members, and I'm also happy to set it over if the board wants to, so Director Green can make his comments. If not, I'm going to vote against it. I think board members who are going to support it.
Director Green is here. I'll just wait for everybody to get done.
Yeah, Herman just got on. I didn't know.
Channeling him, God.
I think board members who are going to move this forward owe it to the community to say, what are the other projects that are not going to get done as a result of this?
So I'm going to speak on the equity piece, right? And the reason why I say it's equity piece because Grant has advocacy, right? Grant has parents who have resources and they've used it before, whether they threaten for a lawsuit with the Title IX stuff or just getting everyone together. They have the resources to do that. Roosevelt don't have those folks with those type of resources. So when I talk about equity, it's not just because of the number of underserved kids that go to that school. It's the resources for that whole neighborhood. So there is a difference. So that's one of the things when we say equity is what I'm talking about. It's not just black and white this way. It's this. Grant has great advocacy. They have people who got resources. They got people who can write letters. They got people who can come to meetings. They got people who can give passionate pleas. Well, folks in underrepresented communities are working. They don't have the access to do that. They don't have the access to go hire attorneys. They don't have the access to go get land surveys and all that stuff. That's what I'm talking about, equity.
Well, but also Grant came to that same meeting wanting their lights too. And they don't have any lights and the other schools you're talking about do.
Well, all schools, the Vincent don't have lights either. So it ain't all schools.
Okay.
But I think it's good. We didn't authorize that. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I don't think that's the comparison, Chair Hollins, I think the comparison is why not use $2.5 million to solve the problems at Ockley Green, right? Like why, Director Green, I would love to hear from you since I didn't realize you were here. Like what are the trade-offs here?
So thank you, everyone. I apologize. I've been trying to figure out how to get on. I'm sitting in a hotel room. So there's that. When we start talking about Roosevelt, I want us to also recognize that we've been kicking the can on Roosevelt since we began the modernization project. We keep kicking the can down the road saying that, there's going to be some other money and we'll be able to use that money. And then when the other money comes up, there's always a higher, something else that ranks on the higher priority scale. The reality is all of our schools need a lot of support. And we don't have enough money to take care of all the problems that our schools have. within all the schools. And I want to see all of our schools get the support and the funding and the type of resources that they need. I want to see everybody in schools where the heat works when it's supposed to work and the air works when it's supposed to work. I'm speaking about Roosevelt right now because Roosevelt, for it to be one of our schools that serves, marginalized kids, the marginalized community, doesn't have a lot of the supports, and yet they were able to raise a lot of the funding on their own, going out to community members, going out to business organizations, going out to the different ones to try to figure out how to get something when nobody was giving them anything. And they weren't the only school. So I've made the mistake of saying that Roosevelt was the only school that did this. And then I find out later that that's not actually the case. There were a few other schools that did it, but those few other schools also were in communities where the funding was a lot more significant than it was in the Roosevelt community. So although those other communities may have been able to do it, it wasn't quite the same when you start thinking about millionaires. When millionaires give up hundreds of thousands of dollars is not a big deal. But when mom and pops give up hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's a big deal. It's significant. We keep kicking the can when it comes to Roosevelt. So we keep telling our Black students and our brown students that, you know what, there's always going to be some money later. You just keep holding on. You just keep waiting. And we're going to get this for you. And all the while, we're trusting and we're believing that it's actually going to happen. And in fact, it never does. It just keeps getting pushed down the road for the next date. Now, yes, Andrew, everything that you're talking about is dead on. We have middle schools that need support. George middle schools could use support. Cesar Chavez, there's a lot of middle schools within that same area that could use some support. But those middle schools haven't been promised year after year some of the same things that Roosevelt has been promised. And we need to stop kicking this can down the road, and we just need to do it. We need to stop lying and saying that, hey, we care about you. Honestly, we do. Just wait till the next time. Let's do it and let's get it done. And then when it comes time to do the stuff with the middle schools, let's just do it and let's get it done. Let's not keep waiting and saying next time, because the thing that is always approaching and never arrives is tomorrow. And that's what we keep telling Roosevelt. Wait till tomorrow. So my issue with this is that we've been telling them that it's going to come and it hasn't arrived. We've been saying that we're going to do it and we haven't done it. The time is now. It's not about tomorrow. It's about what we can do today. We can decide today that we're going to end this situation. We're going to appreciate Roosevelt and the Roosevelt community for all the hard labor that they put into this, understanding that they all made sacrifices, understand that they all gave. And we're going to allow this to be the first step on the ladder that says we're going to start beginning to do the things that we said we were going to do as it pertains to our schools. And those other schools that we promised stuff to, then we need to stop kicking the can down the road and we need to figure out how to get there. But I think it starts with Roosevelt. The same way the modernization project started with Roosevelt, I think the day of kicking the can down the road needs to stop here, and we need to start doing what we said we were going to do. And that's where I sit with that, Andrew. You've been a part of this board for a long time, and I know that you've seen a lot of the stuff that goes on. I know that you're aware of it, and I also know that you're very frugal, and you want to know where it's all going to come from. And we go back and forth on these types of things a lot. I get it. I get it. And I also recognize that we have an opportunity now to make something right with the community that we have wronged for years.
All right, thank you, Director Green. Any other questions?
Just want to ask Andrew, sounds like the main thing you're bothered by is it just says we're going to do this without saying where we're going to get the money, right?
Yeah, and we don't need to prolong the conversation. I think Director Green, to your point, I appreciate it all. What you're talking about is advocacy for Roosevelt, and we're talking about what Roosevelt gets, and that's very important. What the conversation is missing is what is not going to happen instead. And I'll be blunt. What are we going to tell the next school that experiences a failure that kicks a teacher out of their classroom or a whole wing that shuts down or something else that happens, that where this $2.5 million, could have been spent. And I guess I just want to make it clear, that is the decision. We're not, as a board, just making a decision tonight. Do we support grandstands at Roosevelt or not? We're saying, do we support grandstands over some of the other project, which is why I would support, and I would be a cheerleader for putting this money in the bond, because then we're very clearly saying to the community, this money, it's designated for the grandstands. This is what you're voting on, among lots of other things, and that's what we're going to spend it on. Taking money that wasn't allocated for it, that could be spent on these other higher priorities, and moving to the grandstands, it's a policy decision, one the board can absolutely make, and one that I'm concerned about.
I have a question about, so we're talking about grandstands, which I'm not a sports person, so pardon me to my colleagues, but are the other systems at the building, to your knowledge, working, the heating, ventilating, and the roof, and some of those other pieces?
I can't speak with precision on all the systems. The Roosevelt had mechanical system challenges for a number of years, much in part due to the phasing of which it was completed.
Okay.
Those have largely been resolved. Roosevelt has also had a number of additions and phases of additional improvement over the years. So I think generally it's definitely one of our better facilities. It's, one of the very top best, it's one of our newer facilities compared to our schools that are technically considered in critical condition from a facility condition.
Dan, would it also be accurate to say that the building underneath the grandstands is technically like condemned? Like we don't want nobody going in it. We use caution tape over it and tell them, don't use this building because we don't trust it.
I'm not familiar with the specific addition of that facility, but we can certainly find that out.
Oh, I know. I know that we only allow the athletic director to go into the building because it used to be like a storage room, and now they can barely use it, and so it's considered technically an unsafe space, but it hasn't completely fallen down yet, so it's somewhat okay still. This is the type of stuff that I'm talking about, that we allow this mediocre stuff to continue to persist in our marginalized schools or in our marginalized communities. We allow these types of things to continue to sit there and continue to fester and continue to go along. And then we turn around and say, trust that the system has your best interest in mind. Well, the reason that I struggle with that is because I haven't seen it. And so you're asking me to have faith in something that I haven't seen before. And so that's where I'm struggling. And so that's why I feel like we need to do this now. We need to stop kicking the can down the road, and we need to get this done for our students now.
Well, just act with the with this resolution here, and the grandstands getting done, getting assessed by the time for 24 spring sports. Would that money could have been used elsewhere in that same sort of time frame? And would that affect if we actually add extra money like we're doing for deferred maintenance on the bond that we hopefully get passed in November? So I don't look at it as we're choosing this or over this. I think it's like, okay, we're going to do this now, and then with the bond, we can add extra money for deferred maintenance to work on all the other stuff that you talked about. So, any other questions, thoughts? All right.
Plumbing seems very urgent to me.
Well, that's supposed to be getting done by insurance, so.
But we don't know how much of that is covered and whether it will be covered.
And just because so insurance
I just
won't
beg
cover
the question.
everything on the Gray and Markham, and won't cover the majority, or we're expecting. I don't think anyone knows that final answer. We had 20 other schools that experienced water damage from that storm event, and we've had a number of other schools, and we're just talking about plumbing, that have had plumbing damage, and some have been closed during the school year for shorter periods of time, but they've been closed. Insurance does not cover those impacts, and we have other impacts from other building systems. Exterior skin, leaking windows, mechanical systems, electrical systems.
So that's my question is, for all the things that you mentioned, when is the timeline to get those fixed? I'm sure that's gonna be more than $2.5 million. So what is the timeline of getting those fixed? And with that timeline, could that particular timeline come after, or will that particular timeline come after the 2024 bond?
So there are absolutely projects that we want to complete. I mean, referenced in the staff memo, there's our plumbers have identified 5 to 10 sewer mains that need to be replaced. There's two real challenges in it. One is growth resources. One is money, and two is staff. We only have so many staff. So if we do allocate funds and specifically a timeline, we are then allocating funds to that project, and we are taking resources, staff, to complete that project away from other projects that are currently either active or planned.
So let's get to my question is, if we talk about the projects that you're mentioning, and with this timeline that they have here for the grandstands, the stuff that you're mentioning, that timeline would happen before the 2024 bond with the staffing that you're talking about, or would it happen after the 2024 bond?
If you're asking if all deferred maintenance would be completed.
Just the ones that you mentioned. Just the one that you mentioned.
Let me add some context. So we have a facility condition assessment, for example. There's literally thousands of deficiencies noted. Those require further investigation to actually put together a scope of work to go out and bid that and complete that work. So to say that they're not all shovel ready, so to say that we would spend that specific amount of money in 6 months, I don't think is accurate. What I think to say is if we could plan for those funds, then those projects would move forward.
So it's safe to say that with the deferred maintenance that you're mentioning, those would not necessarily get done before the 2024 bond is passed. Safe to say that.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I mean, this is a difficult decision, and yeah, I'm supportive, but it's one of those things where I wish I could vote yes on this 5 years ago. Right? Like, I think there's, again, it's what Director Green's saying, right? We have a situation where, you know, whether real or not, but, you know, there has been the impact of Roosevelt and the community feeling forgotten for years and years and years. And, and you know, it wasn't on purpose, because I know, you know, one of the things are you know, I'm a stickler for deferred maintenance. That's like one of my top priorities. Excuse me, I didn't drink enough water today. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I wish we could have done this 5 years ago, but we didn't. And here we are in even probably more precarious, worse situation. You know, there's also the non-monetary costs of a community that feels like it's not, again, waiting or having been promised something and not getting it. And, you know, when we weigh that cost, I think that kind of tips me over the fence.
So I want to just speak to that too, because so I was here the first month back on the board in 2017 is when we opened Roosevelt. And yes, it was one of the first schools in the bond, but it's the only school that we built for 1,400 students. And it was like, you're going to get lesser because you have fewer students. And they then spent, I don't know, Dan, but 2 or 3 years coming to Facility and Operations Committee meeting about the CTE space. So much time. Because they didn't get adequate CTE space, and then they, you know, they had to come advocate for, like, give us some CTE space. And so, you know, I would say I don't think it was an intentional shorting of Roosevelt, but I think that was the impact that the community felt. I think we hadn't had a bond since 1995, so. You know, our ed specs have gotten better and crisper in subsequent bonds. But that first bond, I mean, for sure, they had to come back and advocate for things that are now just automatic in some of the projects. And like I say, I saw, you know, my neighborhood high school, Franklin, what, you know, some of the things that we didn't ask parents to pay for material now. We didn't on other projects. So again, I don't think it was intentional, but certainly the impact was, they had to come back on our community for 2 years, more CTE space at Roosevelt. And we learned from that. And I think then when there was a question like, should we build, at the time Madison, now McDaniel, for 1,700 students? Or should we build it for 1,400 like we did for Roosevelt? We said, no, we're going to build it for 1,700 because that's the right thing to do for that community. And
Wow.
I think it was the right decision. So again, I don't think it was, it probably lands to the Roosevelt community as feeling that way because that's what the impact was.
And they asked for 1,700.
Yeah. And
They wanted to be at 1,700.
So to me, I just see this as doing what we did for the other high schools. And unfortunately, as Eddie said, like, years later.
I just think it's an unfinished project and we should finish it and it's gonna cost money and that money is never, there's never gonna be enough money. And we can't take it to one other particular project. So it just sounds, as I'm listening to this, that it's unfinished and we need to finish it. And I wish that somehow, maybe in the resolution, it had said the money is coming from blah, blah, wherever we're bringing it from. But I think we know we don't have enough, but this is something that needs to be finished.
Can I ask one more question then? Yeah, I think I'm with you too. I 100% support the grandstands and completing the project. And wonder if there's enough money in the contingency in these bond projects to cover at least the Roosevelt. I mean, they're kind of clumped together in the resolution, but.
So the resolution.
Recognizing, and I also wish the resolution was a little bit more clear. And I also wish I would have heard about it and had a chance to kind of socialize the idea. I feel like the entire board needs to hear about decisions, things that we need to make decisions on prior to a public meeting.
For what it's worth, it did come out of, it was in the Facility and Operations Committee 2 or 3 times.
It was never discussed at a board meeting.
Yeah, I didn't say that. I said, we have a committee system.
Yes.
And we discuss things at board meetings.
I'm not arguing.
No, but I just want to be clear, you've said many, many times that things need to come to a board meeting once and be discussed before they're voted on. And you didn't do that with this resolution.
I'm not saying that. I'm answering Michelle's thing. It's like there was a robust conversation in the committee.
And I don't usually go to those, and I also don't usually check the agendas until after the meeting,
So this is also why we should not skip our
Process.
committee reports. Because there are things that happen, because things that happen in committee, the way that they should get reported to the full board, if people don't come to the meeting, if they're not on the committee, is that then the committee chairs are reporting what happened in the committee meetings. And sometimes, for efficiency's sake, those get skipped, and they probably shouldn't. Because I agree, you shouldn't come to the board that have never been daylighted. But it did come up in committee several times.
Well, I guess my thought was, we're in a board meeting now, we're discussing it. So this is a discussion.
Yeah.
Right? Unless I'm missing something.
There's not a lot of time. As Michelle said, there's not a lot of time. I didn't even know about this. I happened to show up at the end of the F&O committee when y'all voted on it, and I was like, Roosevelt grandstands, that's interesting.
Right.
So I've tried to get up to speed a little bit on it since then. But it would have been nice that, had we had a conversation at a board meeting and then, a vote, a couple weeks later.
Okay, gotcha.
And Chair Hollins, I also just want to appreciate you for daylighting the issue about advocacy. Because if equity isn't just about, skin color or whatever, it also has income and privilege and, the grant community does have resources to, come and advocate locally for the things that are in the community and those.
Well, and in all those districts and schools, whether they've got money or not, it's the kids we're thinking about in all the schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we can keep using equity all the time. We have to think we want the best for each school. And Roosevelt needed, they were voted on the school, it should be finished, so let's finish it. We don't always have to be, one school needs it more than the other, they all need it.
And can I ask one more question? So the ed specs at the time that Roosevelt was put on the bond, was it did it have 1,700? Because now I thought that was the spec says 1,700. Was that not the case?
What was that question again, Michelle? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
The ed spec, the specifications book that we go by to modernize schools, I believe now calls for building it to the size of 1,700. But I was curious what the spec said at the time. I'm just curious about it. I know
At the time, they did a Portland, and Dan could jump in, but they did a Portland State University study, and they were talking about the Roosevelt community wasn't going to grow beyond what it was. So they technically wanted to build school to 1,200. The community began to advocate for 1,700. And at the end of the day, they landed at 1,400 with a promise that on the east side of the school where the cafeteria used to be, that they would put money into the next bond so that they could build up a space that would hold the other 300 students in the years to come. But that was going to be a promise that was coming. Again, what I keep bringing up and what I keep trying to spell out is that when it comes to the Roosevelt community, it's like you're the children under the stairs. You're you're the stepchild. And take what you can get and be happy with what we gave you. And then we come back and we say, oh, that wasn't cool. And we give every other school after that everything that, that we promised. We're going to get you to
Director Green, gotcha. We got time. I want to go ahead and call the vote.
Can I just
Answer that specific about the ed specs?
Sure.
Do you need
I'm
to
sorry.
vote?
No, I don't.
Like some context, if it's
Well,
helpful.
is it going to help? Is the contact that you're going to give is going to impede your vote?
It
Okay, so can you guys get together?
I'd be interested in context after the meeting. I think Director Green, I'm sorry, I need to respond because I just feel like we continue to frame this as simply doing right by Roosevelt, which we all want to do, and there are ways to do that. But I feel the need to read from the staff memo. Staff have identified 5 to 10 sanitary sewer lines in critical condition. In just the last few weeks, Astor Elementary was closed for one day due to a sewer backup, and Jefferson High School was closed due to a deteriorated water supply line that caused flooding. I'm not sure if you were on the call yet, but I talked about your visit to Ockley Green last year, which was very compelling to me as you expressed what you saw there and the issues. So I think it's really, it's not fair to use Grant as an easy sort of like, oh, well, we did something nice for Grant, we got to do something nice for Roosevelt. The decision the board is making tonight is, are we going to take care of the critical sanitary sewer lines at our schools? Are we going to take care of the issues at Ockley Green, or are we going to build grandstands at Roosevelt? Grandstands at Roosevelt are important. They are not more important to me than these critical issues that keep our schools open and operating. And I think that's the trade-off we're making, and I feel that I need to keep talking it.
So I have a question. So by us doing the grandstands, were those things in the memo, will they not get done because of the grandstands?
Can I just answer that? $2.5 million less stuff to get done. By definition, $2.5 million less.
I'm just saying, if you're saying in the memo, I'm just asking if we do the grandstands, because then I might change my vote. If you're telling me, well, we won't be able to get to those because we're doing the grandstands, that might alter my vote. But if you're saying that no, that's not going to affect it, then that might alter my vote as well. But because you're bringing it up,
Eventually, it's going to get done.
Is it not going to get done if we do these grandstands?
Yeah, or can we do both?
You asked a question earlier about where the funds would come from. The memo talks about the board or members several years ago asked staff to bring back what the cost savings was for Lincoln High School. Cost savings we're projecting at the time. So we brought that back. That $17 million number. But we're also identified, as noted here, there are lots of things that those funds could go towards, and there is still risk within the bond program. So because 2017 bond is not complete. If there is a scenario in which those funds, 10 of those have been set aside for this PSEF allocation through a different agreement, that the district needs those funds to complete the 2017 bond projects, then if there's 2.5 million less, the district will need to find another 2.5 million from somewhere to complete the 2017 bond funds. And that could be something else. It could be the general fund. It could be something. If the district were to say, we want to spend bond savings on deferred maintenance items, we wouldn't go do those necessarily right away. We would probably wait until the bond program got further towards its end, and then we would look to allocate those to projects that aren't completed, such as mechanical, electrical, plumbing type of systems.
So it's safe to say that those priorities that you mentioned in the memo will still get done.
I'm not saying that they'll still get.
Maybe, if there's enough money.
We could dedicate this to major maintenance after the 2017 bond is closed. And I think Dan also made a point about staff working on this versus working on other projects, right? That's another reality of what's gonna happen on this timeline.
All right.
I'm
Any other?
just curious, one more. Is there a pathway forward, I'm asking again conversationally, to fix the plumbing first, because I think that's a sanitation issue. Sewage backing up is sanitation, and I would prioritize that over a grandstand. Is there a path forward sequencing wise to do both? I mean,
I'll
get
say
the sewage first.
I'd say, so we've got 7 non-bond funded, we'll say, project managers may have, I don't know how many bond funded, but they're finite. We've been trying to hire for years. We can't fill our books. So we are completing the number of projects that we're able to staff right now, and obviously ones that are funded. If we just add more funds or direct more, it's coming from somewhere. So if we say, I want you to complete this project next year, whatever it is, for example, I'm going to guess 40 to 60% of our staff time on non-bond are working on Markham and Gray and the Strongly projects right now. Other projects are stopped. Even the ones that have funds, because we don't have the staff time to do them. So if we are going to pick any project and say you're going to take those resources, you're going to complete that next year, that means other work is not getting done in that timeline because we don't have the management to do that work. The books are full.
So could we say, for instance, instead of having a spring of 24 timeline, maybe we extend that timeline out?
The spring of 24, I think, is specific to, is it? I apologize.
I don't know.
It's McDaniel.
That's the big,
Right, that's McDaniel.
to be clear, the McDaniel's
That's
field house
McDaniel,
is
right, yeah.
completed. I mean,
Yeah.
the staff,
So there's no timeline for the
Right.
Rosewood
it's handing
grant.
over.
So we do have time for staff to gear up
And not
Some
do
point.
other work, yes.
to get it done down the road.
They would not do other work, yes.
Explain, I don't know what that means.
So
Not do other work.
if I'm let's say we're gonna dedicate a project manager to doing this, and make it simple, this project, it's gonna take them a year, that project manager will not work on another project. To make it
Right.
Simple.
But if we're talking about sequencing, like the director of the past said, we talk about sequencing, we sequencing some of the other stuff that you mentioned, the past, mentioned that means you can sequence it with those other projects first and then get to the other one later, right?
Yeah, if there's no timeline, and we want the grandstands built, but there's no timeline, then
It'll never get done.
could allocate all the funds that we have for deferred maintenance to complete that work first. before-
It'll never get done.
Okay, we'll call the vote. I think everybody has had enough time to discuss, hopefully process and think, and we'll just go from there. So, board will now vote on resolution 6881. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no.
No.
Are there any abstentions? Abstentions? Student Director Silverstein, please indicate your vote.
Yes.
All right. Resolution 6881 is approved by a vote of 6-1, with Student Director Silverstein unofficially voting yes. I don't like that unofficially voting stuff. All right, thank you. So next, we will be moving on to our budget work sessions with the Community Budget Review Committee, or more commonly known as the CBRC. Thank you for being here this evening, everyone. You guys do a lot of volunteers, the volunteer position that these folks do. They review, evaluate, and make recommendations to the board regarding the superintendent's proposed budget and other budgetary issues. The board also monitors and advises the board on allocation of the expenditure of the local option levy funds, which we're hoping to make sure it's a yes vote to everybody out there watching. So we'll thank you guys for your time, your dedication, and your commitment. And I will turn it over to Superintendent Dr. Huss.
Thank you, Chair Hollins. As you know, we're in the middle of and moving through quickly the annual budget process of staffing schools for next year and sharing with you and the broader community an overall budget for schools and central office that we'll bring to you hopefully for your approval and adoption here soon. As I mentioned in the last official board meeting, this year's timeline for sharing a proposed budget is much more condensed than any of us would like. There were a variety of things that led to that. One thing that created this kind of situation, but there was a lot of things that led to that. So we're in a very, very tight timeline for figuring out how to reduce the 24-25 school year budget by $30 million. The impact of this budget is going to be felt in many, many places in the district. I've been doing this a long time. I went through the Great Recession in Salem-Keizer. I know what happened during that time period, and we are going to feel this. We really appreciate all the thoughtful questions that you've raised, and I want to thank the staff for the hard work they've done on the responses. I've asked Deputy Superintendent Lee to work us through this workshop. He's asked Dr. Bernard Adams, to facilitate part of the conversation so we can get lots of questions and thoughts into the room in an organized fashion. And I also want to say that whenever you go through these kind of budget processes, and especially a year where we've had as much stress and strain as we did in this particular school year, not quite as bad as the COVID year, but it's definitely been very unusual. One of the things I like to think about is how we're going to feel about each other on the other side. Because we'll get through it. We'll make budget reductions, we'll explain them, we'll support staff, we'll support students, we'll get through it. But on the other side, when we get a chance to look at each other and work together, I'm hoping that we can say we had a thoughtful and a respectful process, and we feel pretty good about what we did. So thank you for volunteering, budget committee members, thank you for volunteering to serve on a board, and to the rest of you who are here tonight that are interested.
Awesome. Before Deputy Lee starts, I just wanted to orient you. I know Ms. Grimm, I owe you a piece of paper here.
I got one.
You got one?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
I'm curious about.
We're going to use a notice and wonder protocol to facilitate discussion tonight. And so what we'd ask that you do as Deputy Lee is presenting is jot down anything that stands out to you in the notice section and any questions you have in the wonder section of your note caption. And so we have a slide and a placeholder for us to then come back and have conversation and discussion about what CBRC members and board directors are noticing and wondering based on the information that Deputy Lee will be sharing tonight. Are any questions about that?
I love this. I think it's really fun.
I was a teacher once.
I can tell. I feel very much talked to tonight. And I like the interactivity of it. It's
Okay, Deputy.
Thank you, Dr. Adams, and good evening, school board members and CBRC members. Thank you so much for creating time this evening. It's a double header. I should be careful with my athletics metaphors, but given the content of the previous discussion, but we really appreciate it. We know that you're spending a lot of time on many topics, and this is one of the primary ones of the spring. So I wanted to just at a very high level share our goals for tonight, and then if it's okay to allow our awesome CBRC members to introduce themselves briefly, just for everybody who's in the room or tuned in. So at a very high level, we wanted to share some brief updates about the process and progress in developing the budget for next year, which is headed towards, in about 5 weeks, the presentation of the superintendent's recommended budget on April 23rd. Dr. Adams has described the notice and wonder protocol. Thank you, Dr. Adams, for offering this and for facilitating that portion of the discussion. And then we wanted to preview some of the next steps in the process. So with that, may I just ask our CBRC members to just take a minute to introduce yourselves and maybe say how long you've been on the committee?
Sure, I'll start. I'm Mariah Hudson. I have a first grader and a seventh grader in PPS, and this is my second year co-chairing.
I'm Grace Room. I have an 8th grader and a senior in PPS. And I'm also an educator at Markham, now at Capitol Hill. And I've been on CBRC, this is my almost second year. Yeah.
I'm Roger Kirshner. I'm a PPS graduate. I have an older daughter who graduated in 1995, and a younger daughter who graduated in 2015, all from different high schools, all three of us. And both my parents taught in the system, and I'm a 15-year member of the committee.
Thank you.
Aaron Cronin, I have a 5th grader and a 1st grader in PPS, and this is my first time at the Yoke.
Welcome.
My name is Luke Sussman. I am a junior at Franklin High School, and I'm a student representative since my first year on the CBRC.
Awesome. Thank you.
We have a few CBRC members joining virtually.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go. My name is Caranja Cruz. I have an 8th and 9th grader, Northeast Portland, born and raised, and an educator.
Adriel?
Hey, Adrielle Person. I am both a parent of a 9-year-old, but also I am a partner with PPS in our after-school care program as well.
Taz?
You may have to speak up.
Taz, if you're listening, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself briefly, and if not, we can come back when you're able to speak. So we can continue in the meantime. So as everybody is aware, and as Dr. Husk mentioned, we are seeking to address a gap of about $31 million for the upcoming year, and that remains our working estimate of the projection. And that's that is subject to change, but that's still what we're working and organizing around. We wanted to say a couple of things about our approach to shaping the recommendations that are in progress. And I don't want to read the whole slide here, but basically the key points about how budget decisions are made. There is a lens about identifying core requirements, core program elements, and then for additional resources, additional investments, trying to look through a specific series of questions. So items that are potentially above and beyond the core requirements. We are looking at these questions. Again, I won't read them all, but just to paraphrase some of these, to look at questions about program impact, are the desired goals being met, or how closely are we seeing the outcomes, the level of resources, the students served, and focal student groups, and communities' perspectives about the program. So these are all thematic questions, and we just want to orient all of our discussions around these types of questions, because we are in a mode of having to be even more intentional about these types of questions in allocating scarce resources. We have previously, in your former meetings or former presentations, prior presentations, we have mentioned this, that we have engaged our school leaders, our principals, through a number of means. One is a pretty comprehensive survey that was administered in January. I think we've highlighted some of the themes and the results from that feedback. We're also about to engage in more interactive feedback in person at an upcoming principals meeting. So Again, just in the interest of time, won't go through all of the details about the process of this engagement, but we are trying to stay attuned to the expertise and experience of our school leaders. The next few slides are focusing on pretty high level information about the work that's in progress to identify essentially reductions to central budgets, centrally allocated resources. And one highlight or low light, if as the case may be, is that as we've said in prior meetings, including the February 20th meeting, within that $30 million gap that we're trying to address, we had roughly been working around, this is not by formula, but just in the collective thinking that has taken place so far over the past few months, we had been organizing around roughly equivalent or similar amounts in terms of total dollars of savings from school-based budgets versus central budgets or centrally allocated budgets. That is still close to true. There's some potential shifts to a degree. So you see this statement at the middle says central budget reductions will likely total to 15 to 17 million. So that's it's still being worked on in terms of whether it's 15, whether it's 17, but there's a possibility that might get a little bit north of $15 million. At a very high level, the work that staff teams have been doing around what those reductions might look like, what the form of the reductions might look like, they are likely to be, the great majority of those are likely to be in terms of staffing, personnel, a combination of vacant and filled positions. A lot of details, very granular. This is happening and needs to continue before we have a precise set of recommendations featured in that superintendent's recommended budget. But that's kind of the general preliminary shape. And then the rest of the total will come from non-personnel reductions, primarily contracts, but other non-people resources, supplies, materials, etc. So again, these are all around the preliminary estimates of a $30 million gap. And as additional information and decisions and work continues, these figures may shift. There will be impacts of these reductions, as Dr. Husk mentioned, and we are trying to, again, be strategic and intentional about the possible ways, all difficult, to make some of these reductions with the least amount of disruption, but there will be some disruption, there will be impacts. So some of the themes here, central office operations will be streamlined and services will be consolidated. There will be some impacts on school sites, service impacts. We are continuing to look at spending policies around non-personnel costs, trying to scale back some of those costs, although they don't add up to the majority of our budget. It's still important and meaningful to save some of those dollars where we can. And more information, as we've said a few times, will be shared in April. The next slide really is a pretty comprehensive list. This is reflecting a broad-based approach, as Dr. Huss mentioned, within that $15 to $17 million subtotal for centrally allocated resources, centrally managed budgets. We're looking pretty much at every function. This list is not meant to single out any particular departments as saying we're only focusing on these departments. It really is a comprehensive approach. And we're, again, looking at staff positions as well as non-personnel costs. And I will point out, and we've gotten several questions and observations about this. These resources include, the common feature of these budgets are that they are allocated centrally and they're managed centrally. That's not to say that every position or every investment in these centrally budgeted resources involves a person who comes to PEC to work every day. It is a bit of a combination of folks that I think most of the personnel do serve in a centralized capacity, but there are some, as you can see on the list, that do provide their services at schools. But the budgets are managed centrally. We're almost to the notice and wonder portion of the discussion, but before we go there, we wanted to highlight, and this is a very helpful point that Director Britt Edwards and others have made in some of our prior meetings, that even though we are in a tough context in this cycle and in the next couple of cycles, most likely, we also wanted to that over time, this predates my time with PPS, but over time, PPS has made some very important, innovative, equity-based investments in the budget, and this is not necessarily drawn to scale, but or reflecting feedback, but some of the investments that we've been reminding ourselves of, and that board members and other community members have also been pointing out over the last few months. It's very important that we have these investments and that we'll be able to maintain them. In some respects, they might be a little bit reduced, but to appreciate the investments that have been made over the years and that make a difference to our students. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Adams.
Sure. Good evening again, everyone. And so hopefully during the time when Deputy Lee was speaking, you were able to jot down some noticings and have some questions. I know you probably came with a list, which is great. We expect those, and we are happy to answer them. And I thought what we could do is just start at the far end of the table to my left here. Give everybody about another 30, 45 seconds to jot down. I see people are still writing. I want to respect that. I was always told that my wait time wasn't long enough when I was a teacher. So let me fill up the space with some air fill up the space with some words while you all continue to write down your thoughts. Then I thought,
make one comment?
Yes, sir.
So, and sorry, we didn't spell this out explicitly, but if CBRC members in particular, or board members for that matter, would care to be more in listening mode and not feeling compelled to share a notice or a wonder, that's okay. We're just trying to invite your thoughts and perspectives. And that applies certainly for our CBRC members that are joining remotely. So don't feel like you have to stand and deliver your comments on this.
I'll make a short observation. The presentation thus far has already been presented to CBRC. And what we're looking for is more specifics and to be able to render an evaluation and recommendations.
I appreciate that, and we continue to hear that. I just want to make sure, because I don't think I said it at CRBC the last time when I was joining, I think I was remote. We are working on that every single day. And then we move through the process. They're very intense HR processes that we use, including communicating with employees who might be impacted before we make public announcements. And when you get to the central office, the specifics will start to identify positions. And we just need to make sure that we value the fact that people are very dedicated and working hard here. But we hear you, we really do.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. But we've been told that we're working on it. Please work on it.
Okay, we will. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's great.
I'm Grace Groom. I guess I'm noticing in the central staffing cuts, things like custodial, preschool, and student support, which I understand to be special education mostly. Is that right?
There are some special education people that are assigned to this building who go out and help with services in the schools versus the special education staff that are assigned just to schools.
Right.
Yeah, custodial services, my understanding, all get staffed out of this budget. The custodians are in the schools, but the budget sits here.
And I heard that no specific area is being like targeted specifically, but it's like across the board. So my wondering is, I guess twofold. Why are certain areas such as preschool, custodial, and special education not able to be held harmless? And are the percentage of cuts based on their percentage of their budget equivalent, like to communications and custodial? Or are there bigger cuts percentage-wise to their budget being made?
I'll take a stab at that in my 5 weeks here, and then Jan can correct me if I'm wrong. But my impression that what they did was they knew that they needed to come up with a reduction. And so they asked managers to look at where we could find some efficiencies and still continue services versus giving everybody the same straight percentage. So there's some places where we might have had some one-time funding or some things shifted in the way that we received the money. And staff use that as an opportunity to say, okay, now we're going to make these changes now, and it will also help us because it's a budget reduction.
So I'd be curious to see the specifics of
I know.
the percentage of the cuts in each of those areas compared to
Yeah.
the others.
Is that close to what happened?
Absolutely, and it's definitely been a balancing act. We have intentionally not taken an approach where there's a specific percentage that every department or division or office has to identify, and at the same time, we're striving to see some contributions, if you will, from all of the major parts of the organization, parts of the district, so that there's a sense of some shared responsibility for the situation.
And I would also say the other observation I have is that a lot of data has been used. And so when we look at, and I'm going to use the special education program specifically, when we look at making changes there, a lot of IEPs are analyzed. And a lot of the needs of the kids are thought about so that when the changes come through, we're ensured that we can still meet the needs of those kids. It'll be easier when we can go into specifics. Yeah.
So I have a wonder here. I'm wondering, do $30 million in cuts, does that take into account additional instructional time that may be added on to next year? If there's a cost around that? And I'm also wondering if the $30 million, does that project forward a potential cost around any ongoing if we have collective bargaining next year? And I'll just notice as a part of that our CBRC asked last year what the potential cost of collective bargaining was. I know that can't be shared broadly. I work in collective bargaining, so I understand there's confidentiality around that, but that kind of information is helpful in evaluating the budget as it's presented to us.
I don't know how many bargaining sessions we have planned for next year. Sharon, do you?
Bargaining for next year.
Is there any more open bargaining next year?
We have
DCU and our substitute, PAT substitutes open right now that we're in the process of bargaining.
And on the answer to the question about calendar and makeup days, I don't know enough about the calendar development to know if there are makeup days built in that we've budgeted for.
There's a 15 minutes assigned, is that what the proposal was at this point? Being added 2 days to make up some of that?
Sorry, I would answer if I could. I don't know enough to.
For next year,
Yeah, for next
there
year.
are 4 makeup days, potentially President's Day, and then 3 days at the end of the school year, so 3 days in June.
You're talking about the new calendar that just came out, right?
So we're talking, I want to make sure I'm answering the right question. We're talking about the fiscal year budget for 25. So that's 2024, 2025. Yes.
I think, I'm not sure if this is a question.
Yeah,
I think what we're saying is we have those days built in for inclement weather, but I don't think there's any additional time built in next year's calendar beyond just our normal school.
Yeah, I was wondering if we have instructional time that is not covered this year because we lost that week.
Right.
What is happening to that time next year? If that gets added in, is that a cost?
It would be, but we have not at this point, the calendar we've adopted does not include any additional time next year to make up for this year's losses.
Okay, thank you.
I just might add, in previous years, CBRC has been asked to sign a confidentiality agreement, and we have done that. And to my mind, at least, we ought to be shared certain information that is presented to the board. That has not been the practice every year, and so the attitude maybe has changed. I don't know, but and I have to say, in the 15 years I've been on the committee, the only violation has emanated from the board and not from the CBRC.
So I just want to say, because I think that might leave the impression that the board has had something that hasn't been presented tonight, but what's been presented is what the board has. We don't have if you're thinking we have specific positions, we don't have that information. I mean, it's being worked on, but just so you know, so you're at the same place we are.
I noticed that a $30 million cut is disastrous, you mean, from where I'm sitting. Last year, before we were facing this iceberg in front of us, the outside trash cans were removed from our school as a cost savings measure. There are no more trash cans outside. Like, you can't throw anything away outside at Lewis. And so that's how austere we were being then. I really can't wrap my head around how we squeeze this stone anymore. One thing I am curious about is I continually it seems like we're perpetually updating curriculum, and it's like a big process. And a lot of companies are coming in, and that process from start to finish to the end of it, with teachers having to completely throw out their lesson plans. I mean, you could rinse and repeat a lesson plan from last year, and that's a major time saving. What are the costs of switching up materials, licenses, having to retrain everybody when, yes, I think the math has improved in the way it's taught since I was taught, but not that much. Marginally better.
So people tend to mean a lot of things when they say curriculum. And I actually did that job many jobs ago. I was the executive director of curriculum and instruction. So curriculum to me means you have teaching standards. And those don't change dramatically from year to year. We might get some new things in social studies and sciences, definitely sciences, they should be changed. And then they also refer to the materials that we use and how those aligned and the choices teachers make when they make those lesson plans. And when the assessments change, or you've got some change in your demographic and the student needs change, then you see people shifting internally. But from a district level, a typical curriculum adoption change cycle is anywhere from 3 to 7 years. And I've been in districts where it's been more than 7 years, and it's horrible because the materials get further and further behind. It's my impression, and I don't know this, I don't have everything memorized yet, it's my impression that when the instruction team that's here now came in, it had been many years since we've done an adoption. So I think there's been some catch up that's been happening, and it is costly because when you're doing them all, like if you do language arts one year and math the next year, you are seeing curriculum purchases and you're seeing professional development. And pacing those is challenging if all of them are out of date.
Those purchases are bond funded.
Yeah, so last bond, we put K-12 all subjects curriculum updates in the bond, so it's not out of our operational dollars. The other thing is, since ballot measure 5, after ballot measure 5 passed, PPS got rid of the curriculum department. And so perpetually, we've been out of compliance in Division 22 in our materials. So part of when we had the opportunity finally, because in 2020 was the first time the state allowed bond funds to be used for curriculum. So we did a big catch up. One of the things is before we did that big, like when my kids went through PPS, it was all like 20-year-old textbooks. I mean, it was really bad. So this is part of the catch up, but it's not coming out of operating dollars.
And I think Corona Cruz had his hand up.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have a few questions. Number one, are you guys taking into consideration the board goals as you are considering the cuts? I have a perspective that's more so on the ground as being a site council member and then also being connected with PAT. So I just have a few budget facts, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong with these facts, and then I have some questions that relate to that. So climate and culture support. So I've been told that school climate specialists, counselors, social workers, and the RG specialists has a reduction of 26 FTE. Is that correct? Potentially.
I don't have that number in front of me. I'm sorry. It could be correct. I just don't know.
Okay. The other one is half of the RG specialists have been cut district-wide. PAT, BDS specialists, and librarians, reduction in staffing it's being reduced from a full-time to a 0.75 and 0.8. Then I have all library assistants district-wide have been cut. Art and music dance educators are being cut and reduced in the FTE. And so my question is, how will these cuts to school climate impact the disproportionate discipline of students of color? And how will these cuts impact access to arts and libraries for all students district-wide? And do these cuts reflect district policies? And I will add to the board goals, focus on centering equity in BIPOC students. And how will these cuts impact special ed students' access to the IDE federal mandate minutes?
When you say IDE, do you mean IDEA?
Yeah, IDEA, yes.
Okay, yeah. So yes, the cuts align to the board goals, but what will be impacted in my prediction is our ability to implement those goals will not be as quick because we're reducing staff, we're reducing spending. And the original plan when the goals were put together was based on what we had in front of us at the time. The IDEA federal funding goals and the needs of students will be met on your IEPs. The other clarification I would share is that when we say we're cutting programs, what we're doing is reducing staffing within programs. As far as I know, and I could be wrong, I don't think we've eliminated any programs. But we're trying to continue to offer the same things with fewer people or less time per person overall. Because we didn't get any direction to eliminate programs. So we came in and said, we'll reduce them the best we can and do our best to still provide a service. It may not be the same service. That's why I started by saying, we're gonna feel this. That help?
Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so
Remind us your name.
Yeah, I'm Luke Susswood. I do definitely understand the specifics on like positions, and so you know, other than that, I'm kind of wondering, you know, in general, do we have specifics on what that's going to look like department by department or like school by school? And when we do, will the CBRC have an opportunity to look over that before those are actually implemented and we can't actually give any feedback into it?
So that's a really good question. This is a big organization. There are 8,000 people working in PPS. And so as the drilling down in the organization goes, then they have to put all that together to say, okay, if these are all the positions, then they go over to HR and they have a whole nother process that the attorney helps them with, where they go through them and they do a screening for equity and all those kinds of things. Then we'll be able to talk to employees, and then we'll be able to bring you those lists. Will you be able to look at the list and say, I want you to keep this position? You can do that. You can look at it and you can say that. Whether or not that's doable will depend on where we are in the process. Does that help?
Yeah, so we will have an opportunity to review it before things are made 100% final. Is that correct?
The 100% final is when the board votes on it. When the board adopts the budget and votes. Up until that, they're proposals and recommendations. But there are certain things that get really complicated because some of them have to do with employment contracts, some of them have to do with labor contracts, some of them have to do with communications to the public. So how much of that you can unwind? Like, let's say we bring a proposal out and the board didn't like it and they say, we want you to unwind this. Sometimes we would have to say, here are the consequences of doing that. Okay? I'm not trying to be evasive.
Oh, yeah, no.
It's just complicated.
Thank you. Student director?
Myung looked like he wanted to.
I was just gonna
Wonder about Young.
before we shift to student director Silverstein and board members, just wanted to see if there were two other CBRC members that were remote, Taz and Adriel, if they wanted to comment. And if not, that's okay. We can.
No, we're gonna wait another couple
Okay,
seconds.
sorry.
Just to make sure.
can always come back to it.
Okay. Student director?
Couple questions, do you want me to like say a question and have you answer, then ask another one, or I just go down?
Why don't you say
Two at a time.
Yeah, two at a time.
Oh, okay.
Young says two at a time.
So first of all, you mentioned like that you're gonna assess district-wide spending policies. I was wondering if you could maybe talk about like what the spending policies are right now.
I see. So, I mean, I would say two things. One is there are a number of specific administrative directives, administrative guidelines about things like contracts and travel and reimbursement for meal, out-of-pocket expenses for meals while traveling. So there are a lot of very specific regulations, I guess, that are written into board policy or administrative directives. These are all viewable on the district's website. And, so I'm not necessarily focused on making significant changes to those, although I wouldn't rule that out. But perhaps Dr. Huss could talk about this. Just generally being more selective about expenditures that are discretionary in this nature.
Yeah, I wasn't at the beginning of the budget building process, and so I went with what was proposed by Guadalupe by not focusing on things that might have high symbolic impact, but they don't bring great results in terms of the number being bigger. We focused instead on those things that we thought we could make a few suggestions of changes over what the past superintendent recommended.
Is much as some planned community.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh, sorry. I know there is some like planned community engagement. but I was wondering like if we kind of know any specifics about what that's going to look like, and then also like what the goal is, like what is going to be done with that feedback.
So this is a big part of the planned community engagement, is making sure that we're doing this in public, so that people can watch and see. And we get questions every single day in our inbox, and we're putting those together and sending them back out. Then on top of that, the communications team will be working on some summary documents, et cetera, that we can present through the media or through other channels that parents use.
You got more written.
Yeah.
Keep
Well, I
going.
just like also like kind of part of that question is like, are we hoping to solicit feedback from stakeholders, and like if people do give us like feedback on these recommendations, like how are those being considered? Like, do those actually have an impact on decisions?
Yeah, the feedback from the public is always desirable, but our ability to go to the public and get feedback now, this is why I keep bringing up the timeline. I'll just go back to 2010. In 2010, when I was in Salem Kaiser, we had faced 3 years of numbers that started like 30 million and they went up significantly every year. A lot of companies did, families did, other public entities did. We had a whole 12 months to do community engagement, and we did a lot of it. And we don't have 12 months. We've just got a few more weeks at this point in time.
Lastly, it's not a question, it's a statement, but I think I agree with everyone who's requested more specifics, and then also just like within that, like impact assessment, I feel like there's a lot of being said like, oh, we're cutting this, but it's not totally clear like, what those impacts actually are. Like I know somebody mentioned the library assistants, and you and all I already have the question about like the hours and then when will the libraries be open.
Thank you.
I just have a question about contracts, probably to you, Dr. Adams. Sure. Because we had talked at another meeting about evaluating the contract.
Mm-hmm.
And is that happening?
That will, we talked that was at the audit committee in December. And so you were, at that time, we were specifically talking about our community partner contracts for our culturally specific partners and implementing the audit recommendations from the 2020 audit. And so what we have said we will be able to do is have those evaluations of services completed at the time where we're asking the board to vote on new contracts for those partners, because the contracts are ending this June 30. And we currently have a request for proposal out for 3 more years, the next 3 years of contracts. We're doing it 3 years at a time. And so one of the audit recommendations was to, anytime you put forth a new contract, was to include, a proposed new contract was to include evaluation of the services from the prior contract. And so we will be doing that.
Okay, so that could be part of the reduction in cost.
Yes.
We can't really see that because we'll have passed the budget.
Right. It is, regarding my contracts, I made recommendations to Dr. Husk about the amount that is spent. And then the board will then deliberate over all of that and all of the details, and we'll know in June how much we actually have to award to our community partners.
Okay, so it'll be kind of decided how much before we look at the evaluation.
It will have my understanding, based on the budget timeline, is my team and I will have an amount that we're working with, given any amendments from the board that may happen. And so we will make a preliminary recommendation based on those amounts for the board to award moving forward. And when we make those proposed contractual amounts, we will include evaluation of services from the previous contract cycle. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I just formulating my thoughts. I thought I had you as a buffer here. A lot of my questions have already been asked and touched upon. I guess one thing I wonder, maybe this might go to you, Superintendent Husk. Curious about how this compares to 2010, because I was I was a teacher in 2010, the big recession, 2008 and 2010, and I told the story to other people. I was in North Clackamas at the time, and I was a high school teacher, but I moved to a middle school. It was still within my parameters, but it was not very comfortable. But I made it work. But it was had 7 periods of 40 students each, except one. One was 42. We didn't have enough space in my room, so 2 students had to sit at my desk during that period. It was horrendous. So I'm curious about, as you're looking at these numbers here, we got 10 million this year, 30 million, 31 million next year, and then potentially 70-something million the following year. Maybe this goes out to everyone else who's been around since 2010. How does this compare to that?
So I think rather than comparing it to a different district, it would be better for me to make observations about this particular district compared to the districts I've worked in commission.
That was my second.
I think this is a very resource-rich community. I think people are really smart. I think the employees are really talented. I think the students are fantastic. And it's also a community that wants a whole lot for the school district to deliver. There's resources here for restorative justice. There's resources here for social workers, for counselors. And you don't find those in a lot of Oregon districts, and you don't find them in a lot of urban districts. The whole focus on the arts program and the variety of courses that we offer. But it's going to be a strained district, because when you have these high expectations that go along with what we're used to having, and now you have a reduction, it's going to create a strain. And so we have to think about, as we go through that, how do we want to feel about each other, and what do we do about it, right? So we can ask questions, and I want you to do that, and we can say we agree with this decision, we don't agree with that decision. That's a part of the public process. I don't always want you to do it, Eddie, but it's a part of the process. But at the end of the day, we got to get up and go to the next meeting, and we've got to smile at each other, and we've got to welcome in the new superintendent and say, let's make this work. This is a great community. Let's make this work.
Thank you.
Am I up?
You're up.
All right. One of the things I noticed about the information shared tonight, that our central administration includes lots of direct and indirect school supports. This doesn't necessarily surprise me. I think it's something that we say a lot, but I think it's worth noticing in the data you present. And I think as we continue to have a community conversation, just reminding folks. So I think when we talk in generalities at a high level, PPS spends 6% on admin versus 4 versus 7, we lose the specifics about what's in there. And so I think, you've pointed out a lot of what is in those numbers is both direct and indirect school supports. I think some of the things I wonder, I think one or two of the CBRC members asked similar questions. I think putting these numbers into context is going to be important. So, when I see a $13 to $15 million, staff reduction in central, administration, out of what, right? What's the percentage there? When I see $2 million contracts, again, sort of out of what's the total body? So we can talk about that. And then just more generally, the percentage reduction of that, 15 to 17 million for central services, versus the percentage reduction of the other 15 million for non-central services, because I think that helps put it in perspective as well. So those are some things that I wonder. I know you don't have this tonight because again, maybe just as a reminder of the process, we don't even have your proposed budget yet, right? This is the process that leads to that, and I don't remember the exact date we get that, but some of those details in there will be helpful, that context, but also what's our projected ending fund balance, as part of this budget, because I know that's going to be an important community conversation as well, where that stands and how much we are allocating in this budget to that. Maybe the last thing I'll say, I don't know if we're going to go around again or not, probably not, but I had the opportunity this weekend. Well, I know it's almost 8 o'clock. I was at the Council of Great City Schools conference, and yesterday, it's strange to say yesterday because it feels like a lot longer, but Secretary Cardona addressed us at lunch, and Education Secretary, and what, on the one hand, it was inspiring because he talks about a lot of things going on and a lot of achievements in Council of Great City Schools districts. And, I will say I was even a little bit surprised that he specifically called out Portland for our growth in math scores, which beat almost every other, beat the national average and most other large urban school districts, in the country. So there were a lot of positives. And then I got real nervous when he talked about how the Biden administration's plan when it came to ESSER funding, right? This is the whole thing, the ESSER funding's ending, and so all these districts, like, we've spent most of it, usually there's a little bit more, and then it's not gonna be there. So there were a lot of questions about, is the federal government gonna step in? And his answer was no. His answer was that they are, and this is a quote, passing the baton to the states to take up that ESSER funding.
I reassured you, didn't I?
And really sort of see like what's been working that was funded, what do we need to continue funding, what are the supports that need to happen. And I just sat there thinking, I mean, it must be so easy from the federal level, and admittedly very hard to pass anything through Congress, very hard to do anything, but to just sort of say, like, and he said it optimistically, like, hey, we're passing the baton to the states so you can pick it up. And I thought, wow, even in one of the bluer states in the country with a Democratic governor and Democratic legislature, and we can't get anything above even current service level, much less anything that's going to backfill all those ESSER funding. So that's just maybe the pretext of the conversation we need to keep having with the state legislature, but it actually made me pretty fearful because I don't see a path where our state comes through in a big way for us. Maybe we get some small wins, maybe, which means that when we talk about what this looks like, not just next year, but the year after, we got to think about really doing some things very differently.
I'd like to make another comment in relation to the percentages we can get you, definitely. Thanks for asking. It's really easy when you are working in school districts to know what the school people do because you see them every day. You know what the teachers do, you know what the aides do, you know what the bus drivers do, you know what the custodians do. It's really hard in a $2 billion business to know what this office does. So there is a trust factor at some point. I mean, we know Dr. Bernard Adams, and we know we like him, and we know we trust him, but I don't really know how many people he needs to get done what this district asks him to do. I definitely don't know how many electricians we need or how many plumbers we need. So I just wanted to put that out there because whenever we talk about central office budgets and school budgets, one of them we have a lot more insight into, and the other one we do not have as much insight into unless we've done those jobs ourselves. And then we may have a little bit more insight.
Yeah, and I'll just finish. I think the trust but verify, I think the questions from the community are completely legitimate.
Absolutely.
To say, what are those people doing? And we need to answer that. And everyone in this room knows my position on this. I hate this gulf that gets sort of created that there are people doing good things for our students over here and people wasting time and money over here. And the reality is these people are not wasting time and money. They are helping to run a school district which these people doing the direct services cannot do their job without those other people. And so asking whether we have too many of those, it's a great question. It's totally on you. I'd say it's on me as well, but it's really on you and the staff to be able to say like, look, this is where we are and this is the impact. So the questions are good, but I wish we could move away from the good, bad dichotomy because I don't think that helps us.
Ditto. Also, I was really curious about the percentages rather than a straight, 15 to 17 million out of what's the denominator. Other wonderings I had were, we know that the extras are important to academic outcomes, art, music, dance, library, and those are facing cuts. And how will I'm just curious how we'll fare without those classes that we know can bring get students over the finish line. And with considering that, we're concerned about academic outcomes with all of the cuts that we're facing. I'm trying to read my own writing here. How will those outcomes land? How will these budget outcomes land in terms of academic? What's the impact they'll have on academic outcomes, specifically for the kids that are very far behind? And then to that end, does it make sense to focus on early literacy when we can really get a strong foundation for the students early on before there's too big of a gap to close? I also, Frankie, you mentioned about feedback from the community. It's going to be really important for the community to understand that we are curious to hear from them. And you're not going to see every comment that you made to a board member 3 times in email. You might not see that in a result. So I think being really clear, anytime you do an engagement, like, we're taking in your feedback and we're not going to do anything with it, or we're curious about it and we'll consider it if it makes sense to, within the context of what we have to do. I think that was it.
Thank you.
Curious wonderings. I love the exercise.
Okay, what did I notice about the information? It's it's very high level, and in a cuts year, high level is fine always when we're not cutting things, because there's less scrutiny, but in a year in which there are cuts being made, more details about what's being cut and what impact it has on services, which is, because I think conceptually, we're like, yeah, it could be fine with cutting those 5 positions. It's like, well, did you know that means, X is gonna happen, and it'll have X impact? And I think we need to know that when we're looking at what positions are being cut. Then the rest are wonderings, and these are wonderings I've, I think, shared already. I'm wondering positions that are being cut, ones that are filled or unfilled positions. I'm wondering about the size of the contracts cuts, because from my recollection from previous years, we have a lot more contracts. And so I'm wondering if there could be more taken out of that. Maybe not, but it seems like 2 million out of what I think is the denominator is not a lot. I wonder how this will crosswalk to the actual budget, so that when we taking a PowerPoint and then having it crosswalk to the numbers in the actual budget, because I think we have a very short period of time when that big fat document comes out to be able to then crosswalk changes to the budget and being able to share with community members and make sense of it for them. I guess it's going to be very important in a year in which we have cuts. I wonder, and this this is not necessarily the material tonight, but I'm still wondering about the staffing cuts in the schools, and this is also about a community perception issue, or the reality is, are the cuts, the positions in schools, are they because of enrollment changes, or are they actually because we've changed the staffing formula? So, for example, if a school lost 150 students, yes, they're going to lose staff, not because we're making budget cuts, but because they just get a smaller allocation. And I think sometimes we have to make sense, is like, you might be losing 7 positions, but 5 of them are because enrollment dropped significantly, and the other 2 are because we are making changes to support positions or whatever. But again, I think we need to sort of sort that out in a year in which we have declining enrollment, because I wonder how I make sense of it.
Sure, if I could, Director Bernard, I have a couple talking points there, if that's helpful. So it's a little bit of a combination of both. At the elementary level, for example, we've reduced by 35 classroom teachers. 29 of those were enrollment driven and not driven by a slight increase by 1 in class size. At the middle school, there's actually a little more staff because of the 5 to 7 period day. And then at the high schools, we made some slight adjustments to the ratio, again, that will bump up class size and change the student-teacher ratio a little bit. But it is a combination of both of those things. But at the elementary level, the classroom or homeroom teachers is mostly an enrollment-driven production.
I just think it's always better just to let me share more details, because I think an enrollment reduction is much easier to understand. And then it becomes a smaller group that we're actually, these are the impacts that are happening because of the budget cuts. Because we have a compounding set of issues that are reducing staff. And it's all being attributed in some ways to the 30 million in cuts versus we're also in declining enrollment. So even if we had more money and we had declining enrollment, we still would probably have the staffing position cuts. I'm wondering also still about, and this goes back to the staffing piece, about the special ed cuts and how to, and this is a little bit of feedback we're getting so far, how we're going to share with parents or assure them that students with really significant challenges or supports that they're getting, how they're going to still get similar types of supports and services with like pretty significant changes. Because that seems a gap still. That might be a communication gap. And the last is like, I wonder what our quarterly reporting shows, just in terms of where we are this year as we head into next year. So
I didn't hear that. What shows?
the quarterly reports. Just so we can see like budget to actuals, where we are compared to.
All right, Director Green, have any questions, comments, things you noticed, things you're wondering about? I like this too.
I'm good right now. I'll put my stuff in question in an email or something.
Okay. And I won't ask a lot of the questions I've answered, so I just ask a few and then I send the rest over. How is the budget cuts impacting our board goals, and what is the methods that we're using to prioritize cuts in relationship to our board goals?
That's a great question. And so an example I can offer are the instructional interventionists that we prioritized. We looked at student performance data, and I think Chief Bruno shared during one of the curricular presentations that we're seeing some promising results from some schools that were utilizing the interventionists appropriately to help students increase their math and reading performance. And so we looked at, for example, schools that had, we looked at proportions of students who were performing below grade level expectations based on MAP data and assigned interventionist FTE and allocations because of that in order to support increase in accelerated performance in reading and math. So that's just an example that I added off the top of my head. But you send that in, we could probably give you some more detailed responses. I don't know if Chief Bruno's here.
Okay. I just kind of piggybacking off of Director Prim Edwards. When we talk about these contracts, and I don't know if they're separated between consultant contracts versus building maintenance contracts versus any other type of contracts. But one of my questions would be: is there more cuts in those contracts that could be used to offset cuts and stuff like that, librarians and things like that? But I guess once we get specifics, we can kind of look at that. But I don't know. You guys have all the numbers.
I think one of the things I also noticed is connections, especially maintenance, right? Sometimes the smaller the crew you have, right? If you let go of more people and you have a smaller number of people working, it almost requires sometimes to have more contracts, right? Because you're no longer able to do as many things in-house. So I'm just curious, if there's a link there too, or again, way off base, but it's, anyways.
Mm-hmm. I had a similar question about when we say contracts, because we approve contracts every other week. And I know there's a specific Res-J contracts versus architectural, engineering.
I'd like to just speak to that, just a very general clarification about construction contracts, including design and architectural services. Those are generally not what we're talking about with respect to this $2 million of contracts. We're focusing, all of this content is focused on the operating budget, especially the general fund, which is separate and apart from all of the school building modernizations, the bond
Right.
projects, et cetera.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking about. Is there a distinction between those bond funds versus the general funds when we talk about maintenance? So, for instance, I don't know, I'm just using grant for this question. For instance, like grant, right? If we didn't use bond funds to use for grant, but we use general funds, those type of expenses is what I'm want to see if we can get that kind of distinction.
Sure. And
everything minus the bond fund.
right. The short answer is if there are capital improvements that we're planning or executing on, by and large, those aren't funded by general fund dollars. They are using capital fund dollars, especially bonds, but as Dan mentioned, there are some limited sources of non-bond funds for capital projects, but all of that is separate from general fund operating dollars.
Are those funds that could be used for general fund dollars?
Generally, no. So, for example, I'm trying to think about the bond funds that are still we're working through. There's the 2017.
Right.
That's the last. That's the $17 million that was mentioned earlier in the first topic.
So basically, you're saying some of our capital expenses versus whether it's a roof, plumbing, stuff like that is usually coming out of those funds. Gotcha.
We do not spend. I mean, not that we couldn't. It's permissible.
Right, but we just haven't.
Right.
Okay. And then the rest of them I just end at the end. All right.
Thank you
Anybody
very
else
much.
got any? Go ahead.
Could I just respond really quickly to a couple of the questions that board members raised? One is on the issue of the proportions. So the 15 million, what is the proportion of the denominator? Rounding a bit, that 15 million represents about 2% of the school-based budgets and about 6% of the central budgets. So there is a difference in terms of the relative amounts of the denominators that we're talking about. And then on the question of the projected ending balance for the end of next year, this is included. We have a number of slides that are in an appendix. So in one of those slides, I think it's the last one, it might be the very last one, we're organizing to maintain about a $42 million ending fund balance at the end of next year. And that's really linked to the 5% reserve.
So that's roughly 5%.
That's for the end of next year.
As I just thought, it'd be safe to say that, maintaining that ending balance fund for the end of next year will be important, especially knowing what the 25-26 budget could entail of over $70 million of cuts that we have to use. So it would be safe to try to save those now and to see what happens with the legislature when we do 25-26. Gotcha.
That's our whole organizing around all of these closing targets is to try to maintain that 5%. Exactly.
All right.
And I could say that it's more about process. And Superintendent Huskey, we've been having a conversation and it actually came up, our student representative, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Luke. But you raised a really good question around process. And I think it's just to sort of highlight, and you talked about where we are, but it's challenging in this budget because of how we got here. And the reality of the perfect world, Superintendent has said this, we would have spent the fall sort of talking, having community meetings, talking to the board, talking to folks, and sort of, preparing the groundwork and saying, hey, we could cut here, we could cut here. And then, ultimately the superintendent forward. Because we didn't know sort of the magnitude of the cuts till roughly December. It's been on an accelerated timeline. As a board member, I've been asking her the question of, wait a minute, what flexibility do I have here? And the reality is, we have lots of flexibility if we want to take it, but the implications are pretty serious. And we've got collective bargaining agreements that we need to uphold and respect. And so those collective bargaining agreements are one of the reasons why staff have been notified. And I don't even understand all the details there, but it's like why staff have been notified of things that if we undo those things, I mean, adding a person back is actually easy, but changing that person and taking someone else away gets very, very challenging. And so, I'll just say that's frustrating to me as a board member. I also completely understand why we are where we are. And so that, in some ways, like I'm in my mind beginning to sort of separate out between what are the immediate things looking at this budget that we want to say is our priorities and changes we want to make. And then maybe what are some longer term things that we might want to say that maybe we can't get to that at the beginning of the school year because of, again, just all the, contracts and everything else that we need to uphold, but that maybe in the long run, we want to give direction, which will probably be to the next superintendent, about where we want to go. So anyway, I just put that out there because that's something I'm struggling with as a board member. And if CBRC is also thinking about that, like you could also think about, what are sort of the short-term things and what are some longer-term recommendations you might have.
I have a question, just kind of harping off the end of that if we have time.
Yeah. Well, that's time for our students.
So I'm just wondering, kind of in the context of Representative Silverstein's question as well, when we're thinking about like community outreach and like where to make cuts, and specifically within the organizational budget, like how like set in stone is that, like to a T? Because when I'm hearing things about like library cuts and like cutting like a significant amount of like library assistants, potentially like all of them, and also cutting our mini library staff as well, and like actually having libraries closed in all schools for a portion of every week sounds very like, I don't even think we need to measure the impact. I think that's very, you can see it right there. And so I'm thinking like when we're thinking about things like that, like how is that ever aligning with the board's values and commitments? And if it is, like, do those commitments need to be reassessed? Because I feel like if we're talking about things like updating curriculum, how are we, like, can we reallocate that money to the organizational fund and then use that money to make sure that our libraries are open so that students can actually read books? And I think that the education, it should be updated, and that is something that's very important. But when we're talking about like closing libraries, like this is a school, I feel like those things should be open. So how set the budget, and can it be changed?
And I can answer for myself. I can't answer for anybody else. But like no, closing libraries is not consistent with where we want to be district. I also think realistically, we can't balance this budget without reducing staff. And so it really becomes a question of where are those staff reductions and where do they do the least harm? Every staff reduction will do harm in my mind. It's where does the least harm? I don't know, and the superintendent team could talk more about what those specific library reductions, it doesn't mean getting rid of library, it doesn't mean cutting back on hours. I guess to your question though about the changes, like, yes, if we could add library assistants back, but in order to balance, we'd have to find that somewhere else. If we found that in other staff, Cheryl, correct me if I'm wrong, we can't, there's a timeline issue there. We can't sort of change our minds in May or June and say, well, actually, we're going to reassign you, but now we're going to tell other people that they're unassigned because we missed the timelines for that. If we were able to find that in contracts or curriculum or somewhere else, we might be able to shift it. Again, you heard me say earlier, I think those things have an impact as well. So that's kind of that's really the trade-off, I think, as we go through the budget process that we're doing. I assume you're going to.
So I just for specifics, because I do understand that cuts need to be made, but can we reallocate more money to the organizational fund? Is that a possibility? Can we make cuts in other funds in deficit of the 30 million?
I have on the curriculum though, because the curriculum is paid for something else.
I think
You'd have to have other operational cuts.
I would put that question on the table for the finance staff to, because they'll be able to give you better answers.
I've had a couple of conversations in the last few weeks with people that would be interested in partnering with our district that are that could be considered community partners. One of them is the Multnomah County Library, because they're not closing. And the other one is, don't judge. I met somebody at a Bravo Orchestra concert a couple of weeks ago. It's an orchestra that teaches low-income kids in North Portland how to play an instrument and play together. Someone from All Classical Radio that has K-12 curriculum that they would love to, share. It's free. I don't know much about it, but I'm starting to. I'm feeling that this is an opportunity for us to be really creative and to consider partnering with others. And
Did you say free? Hey, we gotta get them a call.
yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, this is the time to be creative. When you're poor, you get creative about how your resources are being used.
Absolutely.
Just casual conversations I've had in the last few weeks. People in our community want to help.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing? I
They know that
Cheryl,
we're
you want to finish up, but I meant to say this earlier around my questions, but and I've also been having this conversation with Superintendent Medicaid funding. This has come up in an article in OPB last fall. I know people online are sort of asking the question about it as well. I actually had an opportunity to chat with Council of Great City Schools about this, because the federal government has made changes that make it easier to bill Medicaid, and it turned out, even know this, that the district already has a task force or a work team that's sort of reviewing this issue. We bill it for a very small amount right now, but we're sort of looking at whether we can do that. To be really clear, that's adding administrative positions, but it's adding administrative positions that should more than pay for themselves if we're successful, right? And essentially that's billing, for services we're already providing to students who are Medicaid eligible in our schools. That didn't used to be allowed, but the federal government has made it easier, and actually they. Secretary Cardona said that that's an explicit goal, is to make that a more consistent stream of funding out to public school districts. So we need to do everything we can to get a share of that to pay for services we're already paying for.
And just to be clear though, that's not gonna happen in the next few weeks. So I want to put it out there like that's something that we're gonna be able to grab, in the next couple of weeks or in this budget cycle. But that is something that adding to the next year, we can look at additional revenues from that.
That should grow over time.
Right.
You're right, Cheryl. It's a gradual uptick in these revenues for the recovered expenses.
Yeah.
So thanks CVRC members and board members for allowing us to use this structure with our conversation and discussion tonight. I think we've had a lot of really thoughtful and insightful noticings and wonderings. I'm going to turn it back over to Deputy Lee to go through our next steps in the timeline as we go forward through the budget approval and adoption process.
Thank you. So this is the last slide. By the way, I want to thank everybody, all the colleagues who are here, Chang, Steve Johnson, Alexandra Martin, and Alexandra is the primary staff liaison to the CVRC. So thank you for all your work. And so many other colleagues here. Thank you, everybody. This is just a quick summary of some of the key dates that are upcoming over the next couple of months. So we already mentioned community information sessions that are still being designed and will be scheduled soon. Also, the April 23rd board meeting is when the superintendent's recommended budget will be shared. Then there are several events in May, continued community engagement. The CVRC will present their report and make a presentation to the board on May 7th. The budget calendar has a tentative hold for another work session on May 14th, and that will be followed 1 week later by the date of the approved budget vote by the board. The last date in June is more of a technical requirement, but an important one for the TSCC to adopt the budget in combination with the board's formal adoption of the budget. So that's what we have for tonight. Thank you so much for all your questions. We are working on trying to to respond and prepare follow-up responses to the questions that we shared tonight, as well as prior to tonight. And please stay tuned. We'll try to respond as we go, but we also know that we have a lot of details to share back with you and CBRC and our broader community. It's coming soon.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, thoughts from the board while they're packing up, getting ready to go? All right, seeing none, hearing none, meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.